hey, it's 1989, and it's Terror in Tinseltown, from what I heard, but then it goes straight to what this podcast is all about, which is being
Extreme
grotesque.
Metal.
Yes.
Yeah, grotesque. And blood runs from the altar. So those of you
from
who
the
are...
Black Gate is Closed demo.
From the demo, which it's kind of tough to establish when the official release of that was, since Grotesque didn't really put a lot of stuff out into the open market, but we'll get into that
It was in the tape trading circuits.
This is true.
At this time. And there was a couple other things we're going to be playing.
And we will talk all about the tape trading circuit and how important that was and stuff, but... First, I'd like to raise a toast, because, Mark, we've made it.
Some wine and a Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Yes. I pulled out the good stuff, the Italian stuff. You can get yourself a fancy glass there. But, this is episode number 100. We made it, finally. And we've...
it's quite a milestone in podcast history. Most people don't typically make it as long as we did.
No.
Well, it came a long way, baby.
Yeah. We were trying to figure out when we first started. I think it was the very end of 07, beginning of 08. Winter.
And basically just came. I think it was just kind of like a half-hour conversation. Like, yeah, why not? Let's do it.
Hey, when we get together, we bullshit about metal. Why don't we just record it?
Well, at the time we were living about an hour or so away. Mm-hmm. So it was like, well, let's make a day out of all this stuff too. So
yeah, and it was kind of a nice little event. And actually, we were commenting about this last night. How Mark is actually, this is the fourth place you've lived since we started this podcast. Second place I've lived, but the fourth for Mark. So 6 different podcasting locations that this thing has taken course of.
That's right.
Over 100 episodes, So, and some of the episodes, actually, if we were to really get official, we've probably done more than 100 because
we've probably done like 104.
We're double episodes and things, and including this very special episode will be a double episode as well. We didn't want to cheat you on the most crucial year in metal history, so we decided rather than having to be really tough and edit down some of the CDs that we would have liked to have played or songs we would have liked to play, why not just make it 2?
And we broke some of our rules, but basically because, in bringing some demo stuff in, purely because of the fact that this was my entry point into death metal, was this era, and when tape trading, before the stuff actually came out on disc, so I think it was important to kind of validate this year outside of just the actual releases that came out.
And for those of you who are younger out there and haven't really read much up on the history of metal and stuff, it's probably hard for you to understand just how important tape trading is.
It was the internet before internet, basically. You'd come up with lists. We had lists of, you'd tape trade and they'd send a list of what they had. You send a list of what you had back. Yep. And so you always had to be kind of on top of it and have holy crap, you've got the Eucharist demo or, something that nobody else had to still have some kind of, I guess, cachet in the tape trading circuit. Well,
in a sense, though, too, what's strange is, and Mark and I really aren't, we're music collectors, music lovers. So on occasion, I will find rare CDs that are maybe out of print or impossible to find on a blog spot and until I can purchase it down the road or something. But, we don't download very much. But I do know, I know younger people, some of my students who belong to very elite sort of file sharing groups, and a friend of ours, actually Andy Price, is in one of these too. And if you don't have new stuff to bring to the table, you're out.
Yeah,
and so it's the same kind of mentality. It's just different rules, and in a sense they're just copying and passing on, but there was more of an art to it. I think file sharing is just so easy and so empty in a way, whereas tape trading was
tape trading made getting the mail a religious experience every single time. It was oh, can't wait to get the mail every day.
And it's like that, and I understand that feeling as well from a journalist point of view, from getting promos.
Totally.
It was something you look forward to. But we did a lot of posturing, a lot of pondering, a lot of meditating, and we settled on 1989 as the year.
Well, and just to briefly go into why the hell did you have the first track off Dr. Feelgood, or at least the intro on there? That was a song we were going to play, Terror in Tinseltown going right into Dr. Feelgood.
Or Kickstart My Heart. We were back and forth on that one.
But definitely Terror in Tinseltown kind of sets up what 1989 was all about.
Exactly.
And this, no matter where you fall on the metal spectrum, this was a big record as far as production, as far as pseudo, I don't know if you call Motley Crue metal, I'd call them a rock and roll band, but they brought a little bit more bombastic stuff to the forefront, to the mainstream. And this was an important record.
The sound that Bob Rock was able to get was immersive and impressive, and bands outside of the sort of sleaze rock kind of scene paid attention to it. Bands like Slayer and Megadeth and
Metallica would go on to record the Black Album with them.
Yeah, exactly. And so they were listening to like how thick the production was on that, and I think that really geared a lot of this sort of 90s sound in a way that sort of heavy, thick. It almost defined by what Pantera became, which was this thick, meaty kind of riff band.
And I think, like Pantera, musically, I think the whole Bob Rock production method is almost something that became the overproduced, overpolished garbage later on.
Sure,
but it had its place at the time.
Yeah, and no one's going to fault Motley Crue for this record. I mean, they cleaned up, they got sober, and they put this together, and it was a pretty complete work. Probably too many ballads and too many, I guess...
She goes down, though,
sexual innuendo songs for my taste. It's not a record I put on and listen to all the way, but when I was a kid, this is one of the first... I broke 3 cassette tapes as a kid. Def Leppard Hysteria, GNR Appetite for Destruction, and Dr. Feelgood, because I overplayed them, and cassettes just didn't have the wear and tear life that CDs and other things have. But, so I definitely... Big influence on me. This is a 5th, 6th grade tape for me. And so we wanted to entice you and lure you in with a little... We wanted to see if maybe there was some shock and awe, like, oh my God, are they really going to play Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood? But then we went to Grotesque, and let's talk about Grotesque for a moment and why it fits into the spectrum of 1989 and what was important about it.
Well, Thomas Lindbergh, we've got, Mr. At the Gates himself, and, about 45 other bands.
Christian Wallen,
who'd go on to do...
Liars and Wait, Deceiver, Diabolique.
Diabolique, that was what I was going to mention.
Album covers for Emperor and Dissection and several other bands.
Hypocrisy of late, too. He's pretty prolific. So, I mean, those two guys, and being such a kind of...
Alf Svensson was also in Grotesque, the original guitar player for At the Gates.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So it was kind of... it was like the Gothenburg scene before the Gothenburg scene, kind of. And I think these guys were kind of... I don't know at the time, but they have a lot of like reverence looked upon them now because how, you listen to this and you listen to like the Nihilist demos or the Dismember demos, and these guys were clearly, I don't know if it's because they're a little older, they're more insulated, but they have their completely own sound that's definitely a lot more, I think, polished and realized than a lot of the Swedish stuff was at the time.
Well, and then later, later on, you'll hear band Tiamat and Grotesque and even a band like Merciless, which we played on the 1990, the part 2, the last episode. Those bands really were sort of the first out the gate of extreme metal in Sweden.
And even pre Tiamat, Treblinka.
Sure. Yep. With the Treblinka stuff. But they didn't really put out, like, I guess, proper, like, albums. They were more like demos and stuff like that. But in terms of, like, getting stuff out that sounded fairly decent, those were, like, the first bands to do that. And, unfortunately, the Grotesque stuff wasn't available for a long time until 96 when they put a little collection called In the Embrace of Evil together.
Basically their entire discography.
Yeah. So... we just kind of wanted to start with that, even though we're not necessarily going to dive right into the extreme death metal stuff yet. That will be coming down the road, but it seemed like an appropriate opener. Plus, you get to hear that awesome Lindbergh scream at the end. That's sort of like, kind of vomiting scream. But 89 was a strange year as well. This was the first year of the Heavy Metal Grammy, the infamous Jethro Tull Grammy. Was 1989.
Did they put a record out in 89?
Well, I guess it was a
lifetime achievement for
flute
playing?
It was the one that beat And Justice for All from Metallica. Metallica lost to Jethro Tull for the Heavy Metal Grammy, and that's kind
Grammys are dog shit. Exactly. They don't mean anything.
But it's again symbolic of just how misunderstood of a genre heavy metal has been and always will be. In a sense.
Let's pick a band that had their heyday 30 years ago.
Well, just the bands that get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, heavy metal has been kind of like constantly disrespected.
Yeah.
It's only like in retrospect now that you're starting to see like VH1 Classic, almost like I think the main thing that people tune into that show for is metal.
Oh, totally. I think it's pretty much going to turn in. It's become a metal station, but I think metal didn't have the longevity that even punk rock predated it by 10 years or so, really. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just now that we're starting to see the podcast books are being documented. The stuff like bands have been around 20 plus years that have longer bigger discographies than most established bands out there. Yeah. And I think now people are finally like, well, I guess it's not going away. We might as well tap into a market.
Sure.
At least that's where VH1's coming from, I think.
But definitely in '89, extreme metal was kind of thought of as probably kind of a hidden joke. Probably something
it was just not even known of.
Snickered about. If you knew about it, or it was sort of just like a one-off kind of thing. This is the heyday of hair metal. Again, Dr. Feelgood, Guns N' Roses, things like that. But some other releases that were kind of put out in this year that we're not going to get an opportunity to play. You had a couple of, I guess, prog metal masterpieces, Voivod's Nothing Face, which is a pretty revered record, and then kind of a prog tech metal record, Watchtower's Control and Resistance, which was the very last song that got cut from our show for time reasons. So
the King's X, if you want to go on the prog route.
Well, in King's X, which I'll go on a limb and defend a record like Gretchen Goes to Kansas. It's my favorite King's X along with Dogman, and King's X is one of those weird bands that people that work at guitar shops really, really love, in a weird way.
It's right next to their Rush collection.
Yeah, I guess I think of them in the same way. Like, Mark and I and Chris and a lot of our friends are very much into a band like Porcupine Tree, and I think they're along those same bands. They're a niche kind of cult band that they're not going to be playing the radio. They don't really have MTV hits, but they have a pretty strong following. Yeah. And I can respect them, for that. And King's X unfortunately got like the kind of Christian metal tag at first, and they were a power trio. But the lead singer actually came out of the closet in like '98. And the church condemned him for it, so he basically said "fuck you" and he stopped being Christian. So you gotta
see if they would have came out in early 2000s, man, they would have made a ton of money.
Sure,
with how the Christian rock market was at the time.
Yeah, well, or even the kind of rebirth of the prog rock market in a way. They kind of came out in a really weird time. So King's X, Gretchen Goes to Kansas, kind of considered one of their masterpieces. Bathory, Hammerheart, which is kind of the start of their Viking metal stuff, right off of Bloodfire Death. Blind Guardians, Follow the Blind, which is a personal favorite of Mark's here, and always a definite favorite of Requiem Metal, the band itself. DRI's Thrash Zone. You had the second full length from Soundgarden, Louder Than Love, which was I don't love that record as much as say Ultra Mega OK, their debut, and then of course Bad Motorfingers is the next one that's going to come. But it's kind of a nice in between kind of sophomore record. Toxic, think this if you're into sort of classic thrash. You and I were rocking out to some Toxic.
They that was a while ago.
They have really awful album covers, but I think you and I were like, yeah, they're pretty sweet. Nine Inch Nails, Pretty Hate Machine, a pretty important record for especially for the '90s. This is really laying out the '90s.
And then Headless Cross from Sabbath.
Oh yes, is that Tony Martin on that?
I think there's Iommi on it, and I don't know who the hell else is on it. I don't think Butler's on it, or
no. I'm trying to think of who sang, but it might be Tony Martin, but don't quote me on that one. I'm not.
Could have been Iommi for all I know. It's one of their least, I think, acknowledged records.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. St. Vitus' 5, kind of the last wino record. Dark Angel Leaves Scars, Sarcophago, Rotting, if you're a Brazilian black thrash fan. The official release of Repulsion, Horrified, was 1989, even though it was actually 1986. And then a personal favorite of mine, Skid Row, the debut from Sebastian Bach. Ted Bundy was executed in '89. It was the end of the Soviet war in Afghanistan, and they put the Iranian government put a hit on Salman Rushdie for
there's a specific
satanic verses.
Do you remember what the specific term for the bounty they put on him?
It was gosh,
because it was thrown around so much back in time. I'm like, what does that even mean? And it was on the news like constantly back then.
Who knows?
I was like, satanic verses. That sounds like a cool.
Yeah,
like, when I heard it was about, I'm like, I don't give a shit.
Yeah, he's funny. He's cool. He's on Bill Maher a lot. But and one other thing before we kind of dive into the craziness of the music and stuff like that is we want to also tell you to go to the website requiempodcast.com to find info about the contest that we're running for this very special 100th episode with Albert from Decibel. And
several other avenues. So there's going to be lots of swag to give away. I'm not sure. Depending on how much stuff we get in, it might be several people might get stuff, which I'm kind of leaning toward doing that anyways. But at least 3 people will get a box of junk.
Yep. So we've got a lot of really cool stuff to give away. We're still sort of waiting for some of the more specific details from Albert, but he's definitely on board, and he's a big fan, and Decibel are big supporters of what we do. So it's kind of cool. We made it here, 100 episodes. So, but let's get into the tunage. We've got kind of a set of thrash coming up. This is an odd year for thrash. None of the the big guns, I guess.
Would you say it's the elimination of thrash?
It is the elimination. It's the beginning of the end of thrash, but it's kind of cool because some of the second tier bands get to step up to the plate this year. You had a band, Overkill, out of New York, which is a band that...
Was that New York or Jersey?
That area, East Coast,
pretty, damn close.
They were kind of a band I think people like myself and Mark overlooked when we were younger.
Bobby Blitz was almost a caricature of a frontman, too. And then like the more I listen to this stuff, the more it's like you take metal and punk and throw them together, and that's with the bass playing. I mean, just the energy. I mean, they're really a great band that only like bases. Over last couple of years have I really appreciated.
Sure, and I remember a friend of mine had Horoscope.
That was a big record
on tape. Rob Moylan, who we know, his brother was a big metal fan. He used to come in a record store a lot too. But I used to borrow that from him and dig Coma and some of that stuff, but I never really bought Overkill until
the vocals were so over the top that was when I was still on my anti like Merciful Fate King Diamond phase. So I didn't get it yet.
But this Years of Decay, some people consider this to be kind of their masterpiece. It's definitely their transitional record where they kind of got a little more experimental and stuff. But the song we've got is called Elimination, and it was a single. It strip mines the Masters of Puppet riff pretty heavily.
Yes, it does. One note different.
But of note, for those of you who are big Overkill fans, this was the last record from founding guitarist Bobby Gustafsson, so that's kind of a big deal for Overkill.
Didn't he pass? Did he pass away?
That I don't know. He may have. But
I thought I might have heard that. But
and then we've got another second tier thrash band out of the Seattle area, Metal Church, Blessing in Disguise.
Unfortunate name, not a terrible band.
No, Badlands, great tune. Very very dynamic, and also a lot of priestisms that we are noticing. Some Helfordisms.
Vocally, totally.
Even some of the '70s priest influence on the kind of emotion in the song. It's a pretty rockin' tune. And then Testament, Practice What You Preach, which kind of a divisive record for some Testament fans. A lot of people
it's the first one I bought.
Thought they sold out on this. They were trying to go a little too Metallica, because if you look at the
Metallica didn't sound like this at that time.
Order, they were pretty, there was some kind of edgy stuff, and this was kind of more like
I might be looking through it rose glasses too, but
I like the record.
I really do. I do like this and Souls of Black, even though that's kind of thought as a kind of a poo-poo record. But after seeing like what they did after Souls of Black with what came out after that, Demonic, and then
Ritual was a pretty terrible record. I like Low and Demonic's all right. I'm a big Low and the Comeback record with Lombardo and DiGiorgio and all those guys. They had a couple. I think I don't think they knew what to do because they basically didn't stop. All the other thrash bands went away or changed drastically, and they're like, I guess we're going to do Slayer. Slayer always took like 4 years off in between each record, so they were fine. Yeah. But Testament was always looking for a direction, And
they finally, one of the weird bands that actually, Chuck Billy being a fantastic thrash vocalist is a pretty damn good death metal vocalist too. So actually experimenting with that stuff with, and even Eric Peterson being pretty into the whole extreme metal scene.
Sure. I think kind of had Wonderkin and Skolnick, who could pull off really anything. But we got Nightmare coming back to you from Practice What You Preach. After Metal Church, and then we're going to end things with a British thrash metal band, which you don't hear much about the British thrash. Sabbat, and we'll talk more about Sabbat when we come back. So enjoy Elimination from Overkill.
Forward my mail, 6 feet underground.
That was Sabbat's The Dark Horse's Dream of Nightmares from Dreamweaver.
It's not quite a title.
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful. It's a cool title.
It's almost if wishes were horses.
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me of what was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It kind of has that same.
It's like that mixed with George Harrison's Dark Horse.
Yeah, there you go. So Philip K. Dick meets George Harrison. But yeah, this record is the debut full length from these guys, and definitely thrash coming out of England was such a weird thing because the punk movement and the crust movement and some of the stuff was so prevalent, and the grindcore movement that grew up with Napalm and all those, Extreme Noise Terror. So like there wasn't really a great place for thrash in the UK, and that's why you so very rarely hear about them.
Acid Rain,
and
there's
these
not
guys,
a ton.
Yeah, there's not a lot. But Sabbat was kind of interesting. This record, Dreamweaver, was based off of a novel by Brian Bates called The Way of the Word, which dealt with kind of Christian missionaries descending on paganistic
Druid culture and stuff
in the old days. So kind of a cool little subject matter. And the guy that was interested in it was Martin Walkier. Is that how you pronounce it? Walker? The guy who ended up singing for Skyclad, who was the vocalist for
for some, I always want to think of Valdemar Skulskera or whatever the hell the guy's name is, but yeah.
Sorsheda or whatever the,
exactly.
the German dude. But and so also he went on to form a kind of a pagan Irish metal band, Skyclad. I don't really know how to describe them.
Skyclad was they're very heavy, like some death metal elements, but there was a lot of kind of folky Renaissance fair isms as well as to the music. But there was enough, at least the first record, I remember I got a promo of it, and I had a poster of it in my living room, if that tells you anything. So it was decent, but it had almost like, it was like a more upbeat version of Primordial. Like, it wouldn't be surprised if they'd go from some sweet riff to almost a jig.
See, I think I borrowed a Skyclad record from Chris because when I first started hanging out with you guys, I basically absorbed everything that every band that you guys interviewed in Requiem. Mm-hmm. I just thought was relevant.
Wow, there's some lots that weren't
exactly. But
Resurrection,
but like at issue 5, 6, and 7, so not the early stuff, but like you did a Skyclad interview, so I was like, oh well,
I think we liked them a ton.
Yeah, so
which I'm sure it's probably fine now. I think I had my fill because they had 45 people in the band, and they put out lots of records.
Sure. And then the other guy in Sabbat that's kind of note is Andy Sneap, who the guitar player who went on to produce a lot of records.
A ton of records, which I can't think of anything right off.
Well, I know he's
Arch Enemy stuff,
He's done some Arch Enemy, Nevermore, a lot of the Century Media stuff, and he's good producer for sure, but worth mentioning. And Sabbat, interesting band. This record, Dreamweaver, and the History of Time. I can't even remember the History of Time to Come.
There's just the two,
which was the debut, and then this was the second record. They're both pretty solid records,
and they've been reissued by Sanctuary in pretty nice packages for relatively no money at all.
They have.
I picked them both up.
They have nice liner notes and everything, so it's good stuff. But next, we're going to sort of geographically navigate our way.
Let's go to Switzerland, dude.
Through Europe, we're going to go to Switzerland.
Imagine if you were a roadie for Celtic Frost and form your own band. It would be Coroner.
It would be Coroner, and imagine if Tom G. Warrior produced some of your early stuff. And from Switzerland, and we'll come back to Coroner in a moment. We're going to drive up to Germany, and then we're going to drive up to Denmark, and then we're going to cut a little over into the Netherlands. So we're going to take a little tour of Northern Europe here. Should be fun.
A geographic tour.
No More Color. This is a hard record to find. You have it.
The funny thing is, up until
probably a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, I think I've had all these on MP3 for quite a while, and I actually just went out and got. I think there's 4 or 5 records. I've got like the 4.
There's really only like 3 that are really worth grabbing.
The very last one is kind of a turd. But when we were at Death Fest this year in Maryland, that's the most Coroner shirts I'd ever seen. And then we look on, use the iPhone app, look at the Amazon, and for some reason, I got these for $3 a piece. Yeah, they're like $30 a piece now.
And
they're
now
like through the roof.
I think they're kind of making a comeback. They're a band that I've started to pay attention to in the last few years. I found Mental Vortex used, but I still don't have an actual gem copy of No More Color. But it's a fantastic record. And what's odd about the band is they're not like Celtic Frost in a sense. They're more harken to the German thrash scene in a way. But they have a very dynamic lead guitar player who's like a virtuoso.
But like vocally, I think vocally is probably the closest thing they are to Celtic Frost, a little more gruff.
Sure.
But even if you're familiar with a lot of the other bands in that scene, the Swiss kind of metal scene, Samael.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of similar, like even like the way they construct riffs.
Sure,
and it's weird, these little geographic pockets that almost like, you know, Germany did the same thing. Produced these very specific riffs.
Was another band that sounded very similar.
Which is bizarre because there's not a ton of bands coming out of that area, but yet they all have this weird kind of commonality.
Sure, it's like the Finnish. You can always tell a Finnish guitar.
And Finnish production back in the day had that really warm analog sound all the time.
Yeah. So, but Coroner definitely, if you can get a hold of this record, definitely worth.
I think you can get them on iTunes too or something, but
for sure. So we got Read My Scars, which has some great guitar playing, and then like I said, we're going to navigate over to Germany with two bands that we've talked pretty extensively about. In fact, we've done a show on Kreator. But Extreme Aggression, for my money, is my favorite Kreator. I don't know.
I think it's the best Kreator record front to back that really captures all the energy early on. I think Coma Soul is a fantastic record.
Coma Soul is probably more dynamic.
It's more dynamic. It's more refined.
Listening to Extreme Aggression more for some reason.
And it's got probably pound for pound the most lyrics out of any record I've seen in a while.
Which, speaking of lyrics, I want to come back to Sabbat for a moment, because one of the interesting things about the Sabbat lyrics was that they were endless. Like how Martin would have been able to...
Epic poetry.
Oh my God, it was just epic poetry. And I remember Chris talking about this, that Sabbath's, not only their sound, but also their lyrical and their compositional approach was very influential on a lot of the Gothenburg bands, specifically Dark Tranquillity.
Oh yeah, we mentioned that in the Dark Tranquillity show.
Yeah, I mean, just how, like, it's almost like it never ends, it never repeats, and how you remember all that when you're performing live
when you're young,
I guess. But anyway, sorry, back to Kreator, Extreme Aggression.
Go check out the Kreator show he did. They're fantastic, and I was just saying, I think that's probably the best, probably the most indicative of what Kreator's about record, front to back. Fantastic record.
So we got Love Us or Hate Us on the way, which Millie doesn't give a fuck, and he'll tell you all about it.
That's right.
And then a record that I've come to love recently,
Sodom, Agent Orange.
I've had it for a while, but it just is not one I've listened to a lot, because you got to kind of be in the right mood for Sodom. But this is a rockin' record.
That's true.
A rockin' record. And
well, a lot of people are more familiar with the
Persecution Mania
and
Obsessed by Cruelty.
Yeah, I've got, there's so much. You hit a certain age with so many stupid song titles and albums or whatever. But this was reissued by, I think, Steamhammer in the mid '90s.
SPV Steamhammer, yeah.
And that's when I really kind of, because that's when I was getting into like Destruction and all this stuff, as well as more European thrashy bands. It was just kind of like proto death metal stuff. And that's when I was like huge into them. I was listening to it like night and day. And then I picked up Agent Orange, and then it kind of sat in a shelf for a long time. But every time I go back and listen to them, like, I need to pull this out more. It's such a great record.
Sure.
And it's varied. It's a really varied record. And as Sodom went on, they always get this kind of tag as being, they're the kind of like the meatheads of the group
they're like the wicked stepchild of the German.
Yeah, like these guys are just they're just not as dynamic or innovative or talented as any of the other bands. But really, as they go along, they've got great guitar tone. Even an album as bad as, well, as perceivably bad as, I can't even think what it's called. Tapping the Vein.
Tapping the Vein. That's, yeah.
Terrible cover.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic record. It's really good. It's solid. It's more thrash than it is metal.
Yeah.
But it's like more Metallica than Metallica at points.
Sure.
You know, even with like acoustic stuff and like the thrash muted palm stuff is great.
And it's funny because I listen to Sodom probably more than Destruction. You know, I mean, Kreator's probably the German thrash band that I listen to the most.
I have one on Destruction phases forever.
Have you? Okay. See, and it just depends.
Special Invasion. I wanted to learn on the guitar so bad.
And I think it's because I own more Sodom early on. Destruction was harder to get a hold of. But Agent Orange, that's cool about this record, it's also an anti-war record. I mean, it's got a lot of anti-war lyrics and stuff, which was pretty conscientious of the metal scene at that point, and especially in the Cold War 80s and stuff. And Tired in Red, good tune, and features a really awesome kind of Opeth-like acoustic interlude.
Opeth before Opeth.
Yeah, about the minute 46. It's what reminds me of that. And then it comes out with a really badass thrash groove. So you will enjoy that pairing. And then we got some King Diamond and some Pestillence on the way, but we'll talk a little bit more about the Diamond and the Pestillence when we come back. So enjoy Coroners, Read My Scars from No More Color, Kreator's Love Us or Hate Us from Extreme Aggression, and Tired in Red from Sodom's Agent Orange.
to tell us what is right for us. We don't give a fuck anyway. Try to steal imagination from us. Things we believe in, we will never betray, never betray. Take us what draws away. Those who never could create. Try the music of today. Those who avoid any feeling. Those who make the compromise. Try to make a deal. Take us souls at any price. Those without feeling energy or pressure. From money, hungry brains and not from the heart. Fortune, fame and glory are their obsession. Salesmen deaf to music, blind to art.
to the ground. Why? Falling down to see the sky. My eyes are closed, no day
to see the light. Tattered, the wayside gonna die. Tattered, scrap complete to dry. Tattered, confirm my own to death. Tattered, to my last breath.
sent to the graves. You'll give us the house back and keep in mind that we only come here at night. So we make the deal under the starry night, and anyone belongs to the night. I feel the dawn coming away. And as the sun breaks up the dawn, I can't hear them dance no more. There is no voices killing the pain.
That was Out of the Body from Pestilence's Consuming Impulse, King Diamond's Sleepless Nights from Conspiracy, and then we heard Sodom, Kreator, and Coroner before that. So we journeyed to Denmark and into the Netherlands. And we've talked about the King before quite often on many
King's
of these
one of
shows.
my favorites.
I love the King. So we've had
This is our, isn't this the last Mickey D record,
This
correct?
is the last Mickey D
On
record.
drums.
It's the last King Diamond I own, actually, for me. I ended at Conspiracy. I know you have stuff beyond, but...
It's not essential. I think this is the last. It's probably the last essential Diamond record.
And you said this is the first Diamond song you heard, Sleepless Night.
I remember seeing the video.
Yeah,
which is
cool.
Yeah, and I was just laughing. I was like, "What in the hell is this?" Because it's almost. I mean, like the lyrical content and musically, it almost feels like it's almost like Judas Priestish or something.
Sure.
But then you see this guy dancing around with corpse paint and with his microphone made out of skulls.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like what?
We've talked pretty exclusively about how. It was hard for us to get into King Diamond at first, but now just heaps of appreciation.
It's so influential. I mean, this and Fate on black metal.
Well, and you
metal.
had a great SAT allusion about Merciful Fate, King Diamond.
Yes,
what did you
basically that? What Merciful Fate was like when Ozzy was in Sabbath, and this King Diamond era stuff. Not just because it's the singer going off and doing a solo thing, but this reminds me so much of Ozzy stuff purely in the tone that it's less
Randy
aggressive,
Rhodes,
it's
Jakey
more
Lee
flamboyant.
kind of stuff, yeah.
So it was that really kind of, and it's not. I don't think it's any kind of like huge epiphany of this. But as far as like tonality,
Hank Sherman's riffing was more in line with, I guess, the style that an Iommi would have done. It wasn't as like flashy, whereas like King Diamond seemed to be more technical.
I think there's more
flashy
aggressive, more aggression in both of those earlier two bands than the solo debuts. But King never had bad mom hair like Ozzy did.
That is true. Or any bad kind of like sequin suits and purple jumpsuits.
No, he's gone for his top hat, but I got to give it to him that
I like the top hat.
He's kept the mustache for 30 some years now.
He kept the mustache when it wasn't cool, and now it's come back to being trendy and in again. So
and he didn't cover it with makeup either.
Yeah,
you don't cover something up that beautiful.
The King is a brilliant guy. But definitely Conspiracy. If you don't have any of the King Diamond stuff, get all that 80s stuff up to 89, and that's a good stopping place. And then Pestilence is Consuming Impulse, which has some cool templates on it. Not only is Out of the Body, you mentioned that you noticed a lot of the kind of Testimony of Ancient type,
like the riffing
tonality and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. The way the songs put together, and just having heard Testimony of the Ancients first, then going back and listening to Consuming Impulse, it was like, man, this sounds like absolute turd.
Yeah.
But that was, young ears that were used to, thanks to Bob Rock, that type of,
You were looking for that meaty Morris sound.
Yeah, where I could hear everything was separated.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit more, I think, of a tight, kind of more of a flat, but it also has to do, I think, with the weird thing about Pestilence has always been the way they tune their guitars is this weird, almost like off-key, weird, minor sounding.
Yeah, and you definitely know a Pestilence riff when you hear one. That's
and typically they always play slightly weird time signatures, but usually like fast drums, but with slow, weird, off-time guitar too, which I don't remember hearing it as much back on this album, but I do now.
Well, and it's you probably weren't like trying hard to like get much out of it because you weren't really.
It was just another CD in the stack for a while.
Exactly. And Martin Van Drunen on vocals.
Yes.
I think he goes on and does some important stuff.
Sphinx. Yeah, one of my favorites.
Bullets. Yeah. And we've
and both were briefly until his hair fell out and he left.
That is true. So this is a cool record for that because not only is it kind of the first really established Pestilence record, but it's also the kind of first major appearance of Martin Van Drunen in the extreme metal scene. So, and in Pestilence will go on to do kind of bigger and better stuff with Spheres and Testimony of Ancients.
I'd say Testimony of Ancients. Spheres, I think they kind of jumped the shark on that one.
Yeah, that's a little too... They were trying to go the atheist kind of route, and it just didn't work out.
If they would have had another album before that, I think it would have been fantastic.
I think they needed more evolution for sure. But Patrick Melly, a great guitar player, can't go wrong. And we actually got an opportunity to see Pestilence live at Maryland Metal Fest.
They were quite good, although it was hotter than hell out.
Yeah, it was
really
oppressive.
Sunny at the time, so I only watched them for 2 songs.
But Out of the Body, great soloing and stuff. So, but all right, we got a short set coming up. This will be the set that will kind of link the 2 downloads together. So we kind of purposely kept it short. And we'll talk briefly just about two bands that kind of fit together in this set. And
well, it also does Nine Inch Nails, Pretty Hate Machine, tertiarily kind of fits into this.
Yes, you could throw them in. If we had more room, this is where we would fit Nine Inch Nails in, because we're talking about Ministry and Godflesh, and we've already done a Godflesh show, so hopefully if you've listened to that show, you know a lot about them, and it's no surprise that we would include...
I think Ministry's made it on another show for Psalm 69,
We did Psalm 69 for the 92 show.
Okay.
Yep. So, but yeah, Godflesh, I mean, Streetcleaner, this is their masterpiece, undisputed. No one's gonna, argue with this. They actually reformed for Hellfest. We were just reading about it in a Decibel issue. And then Ministry's The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. And
that was a big record. Yeah. That was a huge crossover record for punks and metalheads and any other people that were remotely into, the goth crowd was even into it as well. So that was another huge kind of record, I think.
And Godflesh was, I think, a big crossover record as well, because
later on,
here you have this guy coming out of the punk grind scene that was making an industrial record that was like, had some techno beats on it at time. It was just a weird band.
Well, Broderick was a guy, I think that he kind of followed his own like inner, what he didn't follow trends at all. He kind of like did whatever I think what was his vision of music.
Sure.
And it was usually, it seemed like it had more, even though you've got those industrial elements, it doesn't come across as like Rammstein industrial,
or not at all,
or like Das Ich, or a lot of this other terrible, overly German Gothic stuff.
I would rate Streetcleaner as just as heavy in its own weird way as like Altars of Madness was this year, and Napalm, Harmony Corruption. And,
it's a completely different sonic spectrum, and coming from, I think, completely different, not the heavy metal background quite so much as probably like the Swans and a lot of stuff like that.
Absolutely.
And probably like bits of Sonic Youth and a lot of the whole New York,
the noise stuff.
New York noise stuff for sure.
And Jorgensen, what he did with Ministry, this is like the transitional record, because as good as the album was Stigmata. I'm drawing like Land of Rape and Honey.
Oh, Land of Rape and Honey.
Land of Rape and Honey it wasn't like super powerful and super heavy. This was the first record where you really sensed a metallic element all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And the two songs we picked out to play for you from Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste, Breathe, which is kind of repetitive, but also kind of packs a really nice punch to it. And then from Godflesh, we've got Wound, which is a song we didn't play when we did the Godflesh show. About a year ago, probably.
Yeah, something like that. It's a ways back.
So, yeah. I was living here at the time, so it's within a year. But, and this is two solid bands. And again, most of you are probably familiar with Ministry on some regard. We talked a lot about them on the 1992 show.
If you just know them from their newer stuff and you got a little sour taste, go back and listen to this stuff, because this is kind of weird. I think they're really relevant.
Sure. Land of Rape and Honey, this, and Psalm 69 are
those are the three you need. Everything after that, I think, are kind of pretty Dark Side of the Spoon.
Pretty forgettable.
But so we're going to end it with Breathe, and then find your next download.
Find your next download.
Right next to this one, we'll start it off with Wound from Godflesh to Streetcleaner.
Wound from Godflesh, and that will also transition to Faith No More, Zombie Eaters, which we'll talk about Faith No More when we join you in part 2 download. So
take your time. We'll see you in a little bit.
Yeah, enjoy.
Rusted syringes and
Hey, did you miss us? We're back. And you just heard
Zombie Eaters.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, we just heard Zombie Eaters from Faith No More, and then Godflesh prior to that.
See, I didn't see that. Yeah, it's these two parters. It's confusing.
Well, and plus there's a lot of edits that we've had to do on this page.
And to celebrate, here we go.
There it is. There it is. I'm tapping the wine, so tapping the vein of wine. Delicious. From the southern boot region of Italy, Puglia.
This is Pabst Blue Ribbon from the southern region of Milwaukee.
Milwaukee Metal Fest. See, there's a connection. Mark and I were actually just making connections. We just made a connection between Patrick Swayze and Nocturnal Culto in 9 steps.
Only 9 steps.
Only 9 steps. Unbelievable site. It's called 6 Degrees of Black Sabbath. Find the site.
Yeah, it's amazing how Mickey D and Charlie D'Angelo really kind of like unite the pop and the metal world together. So.
Exactly. But speaking of weird stuff, Faith No More. The Real Thing. This was a huge record. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was a epic. The song and Falling to Pieces were two songs that really kind of define MTV when I was younger, in a way, in terms of artful video production, just in terms of something that really stuck out as being really different, but yet it was kind of accepted by the mainstream in a way.
Which was kind of weird because it was, I think it was similar to, first of all, Faith No More gets a lot of slack for helping create the new metal genre, which I don't necessarily...
Rage gets that slack, Helmet gets that slack.
I don't necessarily see that either, but I think what interests me so much about Faith No More when I first started listening to them on this record, I heard, what was the first...
Single?
No, the first album.
Oh, well, they had 2 prior to this, but the We Care a Lot, it was...
Introduce Yourself is right before this, yeah. And the previous singer I did not care for at all, but when Mike Patton came on, plus having like Jim Martin, who is basically like another member of Metallica, with the riffs that he was coming up with, having that and Roddy Bottoms, just all these weird people together. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it looked like almost everybody looked like whatever genre they came from, too.
Yeah.
So it's just really weird. This really kind of
They look like uniting. A superhero team. Like, united from
Mike
all
Borden
different...
is like, this cool looking dude with dreads, and Roddy Bottom looks like a nut job.
He's with Ozzy now.
Yeah.
Borden is. It's kind of cool.
Me and a friend saw him on Jeopardy.
Did you?
Yeah. He didn't do very well.
That's too bad.
Unfortunately.
Well, and a friend of ours actually just saw the Faith No More reunion show in Philadelphia.
Yep.
She said it was pretty awesome.
She was front row.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've got a Faith No More framed art print in my room. It's pretty awesome that I got last summer. For the reunion that they were doing, I think in Finland or something, Helsinki show. But Zombie Eaters has always been one of my favorite tunes, and this record is just unbelievable from start to finish. From the Black Sabbath cover to doing War Pigs at the end, to even the singles. I mean, Epic still holds up. It's still a fun song to listen to today. From Out of Nowhere kicks off the record. The Real Thing, the title cut, is a pretty epic song. Zombie Eaters has a lot of, I mean, it could be off a really progressive Metallica record or something. It fits in with that. But Mike Patton, obviously being the big personality that's kind of dominated, or at least kind of come out of this, and he's gone on to do a lot of things within the extreme metal genre.
Epicac, it was home of ISIS and a bunch of other things.
Yeah, that's his label. But he also did this, Dillinger Escape Plan. He was with Fantomas. So
another extreme metal connection is I remember Billy Gould, the bass player, used to wear Carcass and Napalm Death long sleeves all the time.
Did he
videos.
Really?
Yeah,
that is pretty funny. Yeah,
or they'd be in like Thrasher magazine in an interview or something. He'd have those on. Like, all right,
that's crazy. Yeah, and they're a band that's legacy is held up pretty well. They made...
I think they get more popular with age, actually.
Yeah, because I think their innovation is starting to kind of come to light in a way. They were so far ahead of themselves. And that's kind of the theme of where we're going in this next set, at least with the first couple bands that really... we're paving a path for, I guess, the next decade, in a sense. Just as in a sense, Ministry and Godflesh were doing as well, in a different sort of way. You talked about the visionariness of Justin Broderick, and certainly Streetcleaner and some of the things that he did maybe didn't make sense to metal fans at the time, and even some of the decisions he made post-Streetcleaner. We were just listening to Hymns in the car the other day.
Good record.
It sounded really good. And that's a record that you and I both dismissed when it first came out.
I got the promo and sold it.
Yeah, so
unfortunately.
Broderick's, he's a smart cat, and I trust his instincts. And most of the time, I trust Mike Patton's instincts. He's pretty good. He makes a couple, whiffs.
He's not as focused.
Yeah, he's trying to do everything, Yeah. That's his problem.
Do you blame him? If I was in his position, I'd be doing exactly the same thing.
He's doing hip hop, he's doing lounge singing, Nathaniel Merriweather and all that stuff. But next up, the Divisive Band, which will probably
this record not so much
people in some sense, but just the word itself means.
See, I always like when the word is followed by 2002. I like it better.
Yeah. Well, and it has connotations, but certainly I've argued, I think passionately, that Nirvana had a big influence in positive ways on the metal scene in terms of opening a lot of doorways that hadn't been opened prior to that. But Bleach, certainly this is Nevermind, pre-break,
This is before they blew up and everybody in their grandma knew who they were.
Yeah, and so it still has some kind of street cred to it, I guess, in a sense. And you got Dale Crover from the Melvins playing on the cut we're going to hear next, Paper Cuts, which also I'll go on a limb, and Kuhn and I used to love this song and still do. It has a very Slayer-esque chorus riff. It sounds like something from Seasons in the Abyss. And Kurt Cobain was a big Slayer fan, actually. And
Melvins fan.
Yeah. And he requested Andy Wallace to master Nevermind because he loved Andy Wallace's mastering of Seasons of the Abyss and South of Heaven.
Nice.
So, I don't know. I think Kurt gets pegged with all the responsibility of single-handedly destroying 80s metal or something like that. But
80s metal was on the way out anyways. Yeah. It was just something else to happen. He was just the poster boy for the whole thing, basically.
Yeah, there's just a lot of vitriol kind of thrown at him. Mm-hmm. But Bleach is an interesting record. Pre-Dave Grohl, you had Chad Channing on drums for most of it. But on this track, like I said, Dale Crover from the Melvins drumming. And, Cobain would later kind of hook up with the Melvins on Houdini and help him produce and write stuff. And so, he's an important figure in the extreme metal world, And then, speaking of the Melvins, we have Ozma. And kind of a classic, one of their first classic full-lengths.
I believe this is the record that had Shirley Temple's daughter, strange daughter on bass.
Lox, I think they call her on here. But Ozma, I had this on cassette tape when I was younger, and I still haven't picked it up on Boner Records. It's released. The version you have has the gluey porch treatments as well, which I have that in a separate CD. But we did a Melvin show not too long back with our buddy Grindcore Coon, so he'd be proud to know that we're playing a Melvin song for 1989.
What else came out on Boner?
Well, the Melvins have a lot of things on Boner, but I don't know. Maybe some Henry Rollins spoken word CDs or something like that.
It's a Bricky California outfit.
Yeah,
so
you got me. But the Melvins, again, hailing from Seattle area. I should say.
Yeah.
Same with Nirvana, Seattle area. But the
two Alice in Chains, Seattle area.
That's true. Soundgarden, Seattle area. But Oven, this actually appears in some other places. We actually played this song many moons ago when we did the Pig Destroyer show.
Oh, that's right.
Because it's on the
Terrifier?
No, it's the one prior to
38 Counts?
Yeah. I think so. Sorry, I'm thinking. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it's on that one. Yeah, they do a Melvins
cover. Or is it
cover.
Prowler in the Yard?
No, it's not Prowler.
Okay, it's probably 38 counts.
It's 38 counts. But Oven, cool tune. Short but sweet, but you kind of get all the elements, the sludge core, the doom elements. And doom and sludge stuff was going to become a popular thing in the 90s with a lot of bands kind of resurrecting that style.
Well, Dale Crover's drums
doom.
on this song in particular are almost deliberately... They counter your expectations. We'll put it that way. You think he's going to hit something, and there's a space.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's on time the whole time, which is interesting. But it kind of goes to back up the whole assumption that the Melvins either are doing awesome stuff or they're just fucking with you.
Exactly, and it's probably somewhere. The truth lies in between. I think somewhere. And I've had the opportunity to see these guys live quite a few times, and they always put on a pretty decent show. But you even hear elements of that frustration when you put on records like Dope Throne from Electric Wizard, which is very always wanting to to go. Yeah, exactly. And but this is going to lead us into a whole nother direction. Actually, we're going to jump ship across the ocean and head back up to Northern Europe for a little bit with Candlemass. And speaking of doom and gloom, with Tales of Creation and a tune called Tears. But we will we'll talk more about Candlemass and the whole Swedish thing when we come back, because Candlemass is going to open the gateway into the Swedish death metal scene.
Yes.
Stay tuned for that following Candlemass. So we've got Nirvana, Paper Cuts from Bleach, and Oven from Melvin's Ozma, followed by Candlemass's Tales of Creation and Tears, and then a couple of surprises. And we'll talk about Sweden when we come back.
red slag on the bun white cotton. The signs are heavily. My man love and drive, he took from under what's come over me.
That was Nihilist, I do believe.
Nihilist. Only Shreds Remain demo, the song Face of Evil, which has some the opening riff sounds very like much like Grave.
Yeah.
And some of like right after that kind of riff breaks, it goes into something that almost sounds like it came off Wolverine Blues.
Yeah, Rotten Soil, I think you
which is a weird you don't hear that much I guess variation or very specific tones out of that early Entomb stuff.
Yeah.
It was pretty cohesive, but
and that's why we chose that song. We were kind of leaning originally towards playing When Life Is Seized from the Drowned demo from '89, but
which was re-recorded back on Left Hand Path, but
we figured most people maybe haven't heard Face of Evil because even though elements of the song have shown up in other places, but the song itself, it wasn't re-recorded by Entomb.
And I believe that this was put out by Candlelight, right, in a compilation.
I don't know if
2000.
The Man originally put it out. Or
Third Man Recordings, yeah.
Yeah, but Candlelight put it out in the U.S.
Okay. You should be able to get it off Candlelight's site or Amazon or whatever, but it's very worthwhile CD to have.
Absolutely essential. And Nihilist, for those of you who are, of course, unaware, we already kind of let the cat out of the bag, but it becomes Entomb. Mm-hmm. It's the roots and foundation of what would become Entomb.
Anybody that's familiar with Unleashed will maybe recognize that sure as hell sounds like Johnny Headland on vocals.
Yeah, and he was the bass player in Nihilist before he left or got kicked out, and then he went and formed Unleashed.
He was the old guy.
Yeah, he was the weird old guy hanging out with us. But supposedly the credits go to LG, the vocalist for Entomb now, but it doesn't sound a lot like him. So.
I'm pretty versed in even like his Comicon performances, so I don't really hear anything of him in that at all.
Yeah, and so, but Johnny claims no, but I don't know. It's probably one of those things they'll take to their grave.
It's like the clandestine Johnny Dordevic thing,
exactly. Kind of mystery abound. But Nihilist, the Nihilist demos from '89 were just as legendary as the Grotesque demos and a lot of those things, and they. They were a band that was influenced by Autopsy, which we'll be talking about Autopsy in a little bit, and Repulsion, and the
Vomit from Norway.
Atheist, or Ravage as they were called back then. So they're drawing influences internationally, and they're going to single-handedly, I guess to some extent, along with Tiamat, which we heard prior to that, put Sweden and Swedish death metal kind of on the map.
Well, and within 2 years, they changed their sound so much that by the time Left Hand Path came out, they were done with that, I think, style. Yeah. And then Clandestine comes out, totally different thing. Wolverine Blues, same thing, completely, and it just goes on from there,
Yeah, Entombed is really ran away from their original roots in a sense, but yet they always have, well, I wouldn't say always, because I think they had that like really kind of strange period with Same Difference and things where they were almost
Black Juju.
They were just so far away from their roots, but they've since in the 2000s kind of come back and replanted themselves into some of the death and roll kind of sound that
they came back and did Uprising, which I think was a fantastic record.
Yeah, Uprising. I really like the one after that. Was that Morningstar?
Morningstar, and then the one in Sodom EP is really good. Yeah. The full length.
I even like the opera thing they did. That was pretty hip.
Oh, the Unreal Estate ballet deal? Yeah.
That was kind of, not opera, ballet.
So they haven't really done a terrible record yet.
No. I didn't really dig Serpent Saints too much, but it's just, okay. I don't listen to it that much.
It's got 2 good songs on it.
Yeah.
It's one guitar player that never really wrote any of the songs or writing the songs now.
That's true. That's kind of tough these days. But
sorry, Alex, but that's the truth.
Yeah. definitely get a hold of the Nihilist demos. This was a kind of a blessing in disguise to get this kind of falling through the cracks.
And while your credit card's out, get Dismember the complete demos that came out through Candlelight, I believe, as well.
Also very good. And speaking of early Swedish death metal stuff, we had Tiamat, Sumerian Cry in the Shrines of the Kingly Dead prior to that.
Yes.
And these guys originally were called Treblinka, which
unfortunate name.
Not a popular name.
I think that was probably more for
shock value.
Shock value, of course. But luckily they changed their name quickly after that, and I don't think their subject matter ever reflected any kind of concentration camp Nazi themes. No. But
they were into the occult stuff a little bit early on, and some of that, but then they kind of even transitioned
it's that teenage fascism with fascism and everything else, all the
communism or whatever. You know, like I was really into that stuff.
I'm assuming that.
Yeah, I'd
go to the army surplus store and find like the Slayer looking eagle thing. Like, oh, this is cool. I wouldn't put on my coat, but
I mean, there's
a fascination with evil.
There's a reason that History Channel plays so much Hitler stuff, and that so many kids are interested in the Holocaust and stuff. It's not because they support it or anything. It's just it's a taboo subject.
Well, it's fascinating that one person could have done so much
evil and horror. Yeah, absolutely. But Tiamat themselves, again, like we mentioned before, like Grotesque and even like Nihilus that you heard, just the last song you heard there, completely different sound coming out of Sweden. So Sweden has all these little pockets of different sounds. How would you describe the Tiamat sound, like I guess in comparison to what we heard earlier with Grotesque and Nihilus? It's coming out more like the Bathory, like Celtic Frost kind of roots.
A little bit, but more, there's still a lot of speed to it. But it's just there's no. I think they're almost more about the entire overall vibe of the song instead of like precision guitar. Yeah. Like there's no. Everything's kind of like draped, in some kind of atmosphere.
That was kind of the Tiamat.
The sound that way is not incredibly expansive too. It's very thick and kind of. It almost sounds like a live recording or something. There's never a whole lot of definition in guitars.
I think this was another Skogsberg recording, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the last Entomb that we just heard was Skogsberg's first.
That was the first thing he did, or at least the first time.
The first metal thing he did,
with these guys.
Yeah,
and so that's kind of important. So Thomas Skogsberg will become kind of the face of.
And Tiamat will go to be the face of terrible goth rock. They have quite a few good records in them until you hit that point.
Some good ones prior to that. And then we started we started off with Nirvana and the Melvins, but we talked about them, but we started the Swedish trio off with Candlemass, Tales of Creation, and Tears. And this is just a tune that when we did the Candlemass show, we didn't play this song off this record. We did play quite a few songs from it, so I decided to pick kind of just another variety of songs rather than play the title track.
It shows off a lot of
Under the Oak,
a lot of Messiah's vibrato skills. That's for sure.
Yeah, and some great solos. And I mean, what can you say about Candlemass? We were saying that they're not an immediate band. I think that was your quote.
Like when you're a kid, it's not something like you just turn on and you're like, oh, this is great. It's something you gotta kind of like, you gotta dig in deep to it. You gotta
sort it out.
You gotta listen to it a lot.
The riffs are awesome, but then the vocals, you don't fit with the riffs always,
the timing's kind of challenging.
The guitar solos are so like, for doom metal, they're not only sparse, but they're also pretty flamboyant sometimes, which was
they'll be like a flurry, because everything's da-na-na. And Leaf will go nuts. But
so it's a strange band, but one that I hold near and dear. And this is kind of the last classic Candlemass record, Tales of Creation.
It's the last one of Messiah, correct?
Yeah, well, he comes back periodically for stuff, but it's the last great kind of masterpiece with Messiah. He'll leave after this record, and I think he comes back.
Rob Lowe's with him now, though.
Yeah, Rob Lowe.
Not the actor, but the dude from Solitude Eternus, right?
It's not the guy from St. Elmo's Fire?
No, that would be awesome.
I'm slightly disappointed then. I'm pissed. I was just reading the 20th anniversary of St. Elmo's Fire, or 25th anniversary of St. Elmo's Fire. It's this month, actually. So let's celebrate that.
But that wasn't from 1989.
Yeah, Ali Sheedy.
Ugh.
But anyways.
Train wreck, she is.
We've now sort of entered, or I guess opened the casket into death metal. So we should probably kind of, get into it a little bit more. And speaking of, we talked about Skogsberg kind of being the ultimate producer. We're now going to enter the confines of the swampy lands of Tampa, Florida. And
Florida.
Explore the Morris sound. Yeah. It kind of sounds derivative, but then that's really what it was. It became a whole scene that really built itself up around this Tampa, Florida, and became the Florida death metal scene.
Well, and people came from all over the world to get that sound too, which is kind of funny now you think about it. And it was a definitive sound, or like a definite sound, but it wasn't necessarily a greatly produced sound. No,
but it definitely had its charm.
And it captured instruments with a little bit of more clarity than they were used to in the whole death metal recording scene, because a lot of these bands, like with Morbid Angel, Atheist, Pestillence, Obituary, same difference. A lot of these, like, all three of those bands very different, but every one of them had very distinct needs as far as Morbid Angel had to have those guitars captured, otherwise what's the band?
Yeah,
you know,
Pete's
drums had to be captured to get the full scope of everything. Same with Obituary, they were the opposite end, where it was almost these long. It was the tone of their guitar that really needed to sell more than the flamboyancy, because there wasn't any there.
In Atheist, you needed to be able to hear the technicality in the mix of the mud of the speed.
Yeah.
You know? So. Yeah. And we're going to start things off in the muddy confines, or the swampy confines, with Atheist. And we mentioned the influence that Atheist, or Ravage as they used to be known, had on Nihilist prior to that. And but Piece of Time was the debut Atheist record, and it featured Roger Patterson, who sadly passed away.
Kind of the Cliff Burton of death metal.
Kind of, yeah, in a sense. You know, this great, you know, just like almost played the bass like a lead guitar. You know, Tony Choi comes in on the next Atheist, and he's a great bass player.
He didn't have the fury though that Patterson did, I don't think.
And stuff, but yeah, he didn't have that rage. He was more technical, without the energy, you know, to back it up. But you know, definitely goes in the long line of great kind of death metal bass players, along with like Steve DiGiorgio, who we'll be hearing from, rumor has it, pretty soon here. And but Piece of Time, it's not as intricate as Unquestionable Presence or Elements or some of the later Atheist records, but it definitely toes the line between like hyper thrash, like what you hear with Sadist, and death metal, you know,
and even like, you know, elements like Dark Angel and that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, but Kelly Schaefer, definitely kind of a pretty awesome vocalist, and On They Slay
and guitar player.
Yeah, great guitar player, along with I can't remember, Rand is the guy that plays guitar.
Yeah, Rand something.
Rand Berkey, maybe.
He kind of had like an Adrian Smith look.
Yeah, Rand Berkey. Yeah, and then good old Steve Flynn on drums. So got to see these guys a summer ago. They're pretty solid.
Yeah, they're really good.
So, but so we're, as Mark already mentioned, we're going to transition from Atheist into Morbid Angel and Altars of Madness. I mean,
if you don't have this record, shame on you. You should go buy it right now.
I mean, this might be the most important record from 1989. It's arguable, but it depends
on what angle you're going for.
But I can't think of this record blew up death metal. We have to admit that. Morbid Angel.
That's another one on our list, though, right here.
True, but they started from a different roots. For a debut record, this kind of came out of nowhere. And just, you know, like no one had heard guitar playing like Trey before. And certainly Pete's drums were so like in your face and over the top, and Dave Vincent, one of the probably greatest death metal vocalists of all time. Well,
he had the uncanny thing of growling, but you could understand every word he was saying. He had a very good diction to his screaming.
Sure. And you know, some people really dig on Blessed Are the Sick and how tight it is, but for my money, I like sort of the loose energy of Altars of Madness a little bit.
It's almost like you're, you know, veering off the road every song. There's just so much energy and power to it.
It's like you kind of get whiplash on every song because you don't really know where it's going.
Well, I remember seeing the videos for
Immortal Rights.
I think Immortal Rights is on the Hard and Heavy Grind Crusher special. And just seeing on the back, I don't know if this one has the same photos. No, this has different photos. There was a photo of Trey on the original Earache version where he's got, it almost looks like his face was smashed in. He's got blood all over his face.
Oh, I've seen that one.
And as a kid, I was like, oh my God, this guy's fucking nuts. What's going on? And then seeing them live in those video clips, I was like, wow, these guys are the real deal. You know? Yeah. And then hearing David Vincent talking about humanism and Satanism, and you know, you don't move your tray by and just pick this up. As a young, impressionable kid, that was pretty intense.
Yeah, this is one of the first death metal records we bought outright amongst my group of friends. Was Covenant, and then we went back and I got Altars and then Blessed and stuff. But I heard this stuff through the Grind Crusher, you know, that Chapel of the Ghouls and Maze of Torments and Immortal Rights. So definitely a big influence on me for sure. And then we're gonna kind of continue through Florida with Obituary Slowly We Rot, which was their debut full length. They used to be called Executioner. But
spelled uniquely too, I think.
Yeah, it was X-Cutioner, I think, or something like that.
That's probably true.
I have some of those demos laying around, but
because didn't they have a comeback record, Executioner's Return?
Something like that, yes. Yeah. And Slowly We Rot. What's interesting about this song and this record is Tardy didn't really have lyrics. He just kind of made up stuff.
Which
made sound.
Fine.
Yeah, it was cool. But a different sound than Morbid and Atheist. Definitely slower. But you know, there's some kind of breakdowns where Donald Tardy kind of
they're in the groove camp.
Yep.
You know, for sure. They're and definitely in the the Celtic Frost worship camp as well.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, they
wouldn't exist without Frost.
Tone for town, just like...
And, I mean, most of the breakdowns, too, are Celtic Frost breakdowns.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about Cause of Death on last week's episode, 1990, so... But I was just telling Mark, I found something on YouTube today. If you find it, it's from Milwaukee Metal Fest 1990 obituary. There's like an atomic explosion on stage. It's pretty entertaining to watch. But they keep headbanging through the whole thing. So.
Of course.
And then we're going over to California after that with Autopsy and Terrorizer, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Cali scene and how they were a little bit different than the Florida scene when we come back. So enjoy On They Slay from Atheist Piece of Time, Suffocation, which features a great bass breakdown from Dave Vincent from Altars of Madness, Morbid Angel, and then the title track from Slowly We Rot from our boys Obituary.
Why they slave to go out to town? The boss
That was Injustice from Terrorizer's World Downfall. Before that, we heard Ridden with Disease from Severed Survival Autopsy, and then we heard Obituary, Morbid Angel, and Atheist prior to that, which we already talked about. But the Cali scene, I mean, we've talked a lot about Terrorizer. We did an entire, entire episode devoted to World Downfall because of its importance as a kind of a grindcore classic.
Yeah, and if you want to hear some any kind of stories or anything about that, I would recommend going there because we are running out of time quickly.
Oh, sure. But definitely, some of the guys from Morbid Angel were on this. Dave Vincent and Pete Sandoval, doing the drums. It's short but sweet, but I mean political, intelligent grindcore, but also some death metal grooves.
Well, and Justin Pintado, who would later go on to basically is on this next
as Napalm Death, which we're going to be talking about here in a second. And then Autopsy, Severed Survival. They were kind of an oddball death metal band from America because
they're very, very doomy, but yeah,
sloppy, but yet
deceptively sloppy, I think, but it was more almost like more of a vibe what they're playing because they're very professional. I mean, we saw them at Metal Fest this year, tight as hell, but the stuff mixes between Sabbath, Death, all that kind of stuff, all kind of like mixed together. And I think one of the solely the largest influence on Dismember. Blanket statement
absolutely.
That. But the whole burgeoning Swedish scene was pretty enamored with Autopsy.
And they were interesting because they weren't signed to Earache or to Roadrunner, unlike most of the other American death metal bands or Metal Blade like Cannibal Corpse and stuff. But they were on Peaceville, this kind of avant-garde kind of strange label that had Dark Throne and Paradise Lost and Anathema,
Electro Hippies.
Bride. Yeah, I mean, just strange stuff,
Doom,
and it kind of fit with them in a way. But Ridden with Disease is my favorite Autopsy song, and I went absolutely fucking bonkers when they played it live. Mark can attest to that. I was sitting on top of the metal cage, just like going crazy, looking over top the audience. But speaking of Terrorizer and grindcore, let's cross paths across the pond to England. And this record from Napalm Death, Harmony Corruption, this was a game changer for these guys because it really moved them out of the punk grind scene and pretty firmly into the death metal scene. They went to Florida to record with Scott Burns and War Sound, and
I mean they slowed down a lot. They got the groove. They got some lineup changes.
The groove on certain songs like Scum and things like that.
But it's come really bubbles to the top right now.
They really play off the groove
and a lot of people were pissed.
Yeah.
Which I was fine with it because I thought the other stuff was too much.
Yeah, well, you didn't know any better too because you're so young, The first thing I heard from Napalm Death were songs off of this.
Stuff for the Children was in constant rotation at Headbangers Ball too.
I heard that was one of the first Napalm songs, if not the first Napalm song I ever heard.
Yeah.
And Harmony Corruption, I mean, I know we've talked to Albert, and we'll talk more about Albert in a second when we mention the contest, but he said that he would love to do a second Napalm Hall of Fame for this record because it's so
it's a fantastic record.
Scum, but it also had a huge influence because I think it showed that grindcore bands could mature into death metal.
Well, and I think after this came out, Brutal Truth Extreme Conditions came out, which is almost like, basically using this as a springboard to like polish grindcore, which Pig Destroyer is similar to that route.
Absolutely. Yeah, Pig Destroyer uses a lot of the grooves that Napalm kind of, employed here. And also the first full length with Barney Greenway.
Yep.
So
formerly of Benediction.
Yeah, and is Jesse Pintado on this record? This is the first Jesse Pintado record?
Yes.
Yeah, he wasn't on, I can't remember the...
Utopia Banished? No, that was after this.
Utopia Banished comes after. So...
Why can't I think of it? There was an EP before that might have had.
Mentally Murdered, he may have been on, which came out, or Mass Appeal Madness.
I think he was. I don't even know. There's so many Napalm stuff. Go check out
it's hard
Wikipedia or something.
Yeah, the discography gets mixed up in my head a little bit, but definitely Harmony Corruption, good stuff. Something you need to grab. And a couple other British bands that we're going to kind of be playing. Oh, we're going to be playing If the Truth Be Known, which is
the truth.
Great breakdown in the beginning. Just really awesome stuff with the drums and things. But Realm of Chaos, Thor,
my first death metal CD.
Your first love.
My first, yes, I liked it so much I got a free tattoo of it.
Yeah,
but no, Bolthrower was one of those bands that initially I was drawn to the imagery, the whole thing, because I was into the gaming back then a little bit.
Yeah. Hey, I did the role playing gaming myself. So not Warhammer, but
and actually Games Workshop this. Basically, it was like a miniature game, where you have the little painted miniatures. Mm-hmm. Games Workshop was a British company that actually partnered with Bolthrower to. It seems like a totally fucking bizarre idea, but it made me a lifelong fan.
Wolverine Blues.
That made less sense. This was actually, at least they were both about war, but they had a White Dwarf magazine, which was the total, the nerd out, learn how to paint your miniatures better or whatever, learn new rules. Had a write-up on both were, and I remember going out and buying this, sitting in English class with Chris, and this was the first time we ever heard the really deep guttural vocals like this.
Well, and the guitars are so down-tuned. I mean,
it's something like you almost like when I'd like a couple years previously I bought like a Crass record and I couldn't figure out what speed to play it on.
Yeah.
But this was a CD, so I was like, this is how it's supposed to be. I was like, this is just unbelievable. It was just like a game changer. Like, hair on the neck stands up, and I was like, it just something like an immediate connection.
Yep.
Like, okay, this is the stuff I can't live without. Yeah.
Change your constitution. So. And speaking of changing constitutions, another British band that really changed their style up.
Album to album.
Yeah, from album to album. But Symphonies of Sickness is really what I think. Reek is a great record. It's fun to listen to, but Symphonies is where I think people really start to kind of take Carcass seriously as musicians and compositionally. And
they figured things out a little bit more. Yeah. It wasn't just whatever sticks to the wall, go with it,
And this, for a lot of people, a lot of Carcass purists, this is the record. So... But, Symphonies of Sickness, and we've got Swarming Vulgar Mass of Infected Virulency. Say that 5 times fast.
It's a catchy little tune.
It is a good tune. So, definitely, and we've spoken so much about Carcass that,
Go check out the Carcass episode. Yeah. Everybody knows about Carcass.
Re-Choosing Death from, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. And then we're going to close 1989, our most crucial year of metal.
Let's go back across the lake.
Let's go.
Let's go to Brazil.
Wow. It's like a global metal. We're just geographically traveling everywhere. And we got Slaves of Pain from Beneath the Remains from Sepultura, which this was a pretty big record.
Very big record. Yeah.
Kind of tied the thrash and the death metal scenes kind of together pretty intimately. And again, another Scott Burns Morris sound production. So the guy gets around, man.
Until he started hearing.
He's like herpes.
Death Like Silence Productions started putting stuff about the anti-Scott Burns.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Which it almost became a trend in metal for a while. Got burnt out, but. These are 4 great bands, 4 classic records, and a fine way to close out.
Would you say a fine way to exit?
A fine way to exit, yes. And please let us know what you thought. Episode 100. I know we've kind of rant and rave for a while here. Hopefully you've enjoyed what you've heard. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Look for the contest.
Look in the sidebar. It'll be on the right sidebar on requiempodcast.com.
Yeah. And definitely leave us some comments on iTunes and things like that. Check us out on Facebook, Mark and Jason. And most of all, thank you for being listeners for these first 100, and we look forward to the next 100 for sure. So for a very special episode, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark. Let's shake
shaking hands.
All right.
And we're gonna have a drink on you.
Oh, plastic.
Delicious.